Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 18th Field Notes live event. My name is Phil Barber. I'm an ecologist up here in Homer, Alaska, and the Field Notes regional representative for Alaska. I serve on the Field Notes Review Committee, which solicits and selects topics for each webinar. Today, we have two exciting topics being presented. We encourage you to ask questions at any time using the Q&A panel. The Q&A panel should open by default. However, if for some reason your panel is not open, simply click on the question mark icon located on the right side of your screen. For closed captions, turn on the live caption button located in the lower right corner. Today's session is being recorded. Recorded sessions are available via the Field Notes Teams channel and the National Soil Survey Center's YouTube channel. Again, thank you for joining us. I really hope you enjoyed today's session. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Hoover to tell you a little bit more about today's webinar. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Phil. Hi, folks. This is Dave Hoover, Director of the National Soil Survey Center. Welcome to the 18th Field Notes webinar. I think that's quite a landmark. Year and a half of these. I took a little time about a week ago. I was down with COVID and laying around, not much else to do. So I did a little internet surfing and looked to see what else was there out there. What other organizations or businesses have employee-led webinar series? I didn't find much. I saw here's one on supervising field work, but it was done by the management staff. Another one on new investigations, which is what we hear a lot about on this webinar series, but it was presented by their the head of the agency or the head of the company. So another one on special topics. I was excited by that one, but it was one presented by the head of a research branch or something. So another one on there's lots of looking up employee-led stuff. There was things on employee seminars on how to support field employees, but those weren't presented by field employees. They were presented by upper management. So it'd be like asking somebody who is the most knowledgeable, which I believe are field people in a certain part of the country, to write it all up and then give it to somebody else to present. And I've never thought a lot of that. I always thought that we should be hearing from the folks who are doing the investigations, who are the most familiar with their part of a laboratory or their part of a region, and hear from them as to what's going on. So I really think that our Field Notes series is pretty unique, and I'm glad to be part of a division in an agency that does look to have those presentations given by our field folks and not just turned over to somebody else to give it because they have a higher grade level or a different type of position. So I'm really glad for what we've done for 18 webinars and look forward to many more of these. We do have two great presentations today, as Phil said. The first one comes right from the National Soil Survey Center here. And it's going to be Amber Kenjar, who's in our Albuquerque office, and Scarlett Murphy, who is here in Lincoln. And they're going to be talking about sample submission. So Scarlett and Amber, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dave. I would like to start by thanking everyone for their time today. Scarlett Murphy and I are going to take a few moments to talk about the Kellogg Soil Survey Laboratory sample submission process, which many people are familiar with, but we're going to also talk about some general reminders and some updates for the coming year for things that you'll see in the sample submission process. Next slide, please. The Kssl has established liaisons to assist each region, and a table of the regions and the regional directors and the Kssl liaisons is shown here at left, as well as the regional map. Regional liaisons can help answer questions regarding project and sample submission, the project status, You may have submitted something and you're just curious where it is in the process, or point you in the right direction to address any question you may have for the lab. As a preferred method of communication, please email your KSSL liaison with any questions. Many of our liaisons are laboratory analysts, and they're in the lab the majority of the day, not next to a phone, and they'll check their email throughout the day. So that would be the most effective way to get in touch with your liaison. Next slide, please. For fiscal year 23, if your project will require any kind of help from the KSSL, such as sample bags, sample information tags, lab analysis, supplies to ship your project, we ask you to complete a request for assistance, or RFA. And this is the third year we've used this system, and it's proved to be helpful in coordinating equipment shipments to the field, estimating the number of samples the lab should be expecting, forecasting needs of analyses, and staff time allocation. So we really do appreciate your time completing this form. It's very helpful. The process for fiscal year 23 will be identical to last year's process. A national bulletin is pending, will be issued announcing the portal is open for project submission. The bulletin will include a link to an RFA guide. So if you'd like to see what information is being requested ahead of actually submitting the projects, that's a nice resource. And the bulletin will also include the link to the portal for the actual request for assistance submission. Next slide, please. In the coming year, you may notice some small changes to consumables, equipment shipments. For mineral samples, for bulk samples, please submit about 3 to 4 kilograms of fine earth fraction. The bag does not have to be absolutely completely full, but please submit enough representative sample to equal roughly 3 to 4 kilograms. However, if you are submitting a sample that has a large quantity of lithic fragments in it, please send more material because those will be excluded from the fine earth. And O horizons. O horizons are processed by volume. So please submit a full bag for O horizons because once we're done processing, there's just not much left. And in the future, you may see that bulk sample bags may be a smaller size. The same quantity is required, though, 3 to 4 kilograms, please. You'll also maybe notice some changes in shipping boxes. We received some great feedback from the field and sent a couple trial shipments out in FY22, which were received in a positive light. In the coming year, you may notice the bulk boxes will be a little smaller. There won't be so much empty headspace to fill with packing material. So when you submit a project, we'll be asking you to please clarify the box size that you have. It's not that we forgot what we sent you, we just don't know what size box you may have, and that information is required for the UPS portal. And we also ask that you please keep boxes to roughly 50 pounds in weight. That is a change in guidance. Next slide, please. Different areas of the country pose different challenges when submitting samples, not only due to sample location, but also pests. And the KSSL works closely with APHIS to ensure that the KSSL is in compliance with APHIS regulations in terms of the movement of soil, of regulated soils, I should say, from the field office to the KSSL. And what does that mean for us? It means that APHIS requires safeguards to be observed when shipping, processing, analyzing, and storing these soils. So we get an annual inspection by APHIS every year. If it's determined that there was a case of blatant disregard, they can revoke our permit, which means we couldn't analyze half of the country. Our permit holder can go to jail. So if we seem hypersensitive about APHIS, it's because they're very serious and they are paying attention to the movement of soils around the United States. Next slide, please. So APHIS has a national map, and the take-home message from this slide is that if you are sampling in a county that is presented in any color listed in the map key, your samples are regulated by APHIS. And this map is updated frequently, so it's important to bookmark if you're in an area that might change. We can provide this link to you if it's of interest, but it does change probably every month or two. Once regulated, always regulated by the Kssl. This may sound strange, but it could apply to your work if you're sampling in a county which experiences something such as fruit fly quarantines, because those change. But even though there may not be a seasonal quarantine, that county is still considered regulated. Next slide, please. In addition to APHIS, there is the Nebraska Department of Agriculture quarantines. Many states have their own pests of concern, and Nebraska does as well. And it considers the entire West Coast and random counties throughout the West regulated for nematodes. An example where this could get confusing is if you're working in Washington State. Washington State has no APHIS regulated counties in it. However, when sending them to the Kssl, they will be considered regulated because of the Nebraska Department of Ag. Next slide, please. In order to address all of the regulated sample requirements, shipping protocols have been standardized to account for all of the APHIS requirements. So if you're shipping within the contiguous United States, we've covered all the bases by sending you multiple bags. So your sample bags go in this large, heavy plastic liner. Samples have to be bagged and boxed, so that's why we ask for the clod boxes to be placed in these thin liner bags. And we send these double-walled corrugated shipping boxes. By having everyone use the same materials, everyone is covering the requirements of APHIS. And then the third point here is do not ship standing water or soupy samples. If you're working in Alaska with permafrost samples, or if you're in a coastal area, please contact us and we can help you work through the process. If you are outside of the contiguous United States, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, please contact us about 4 weeks ahead of when you would like to submit your project, because there is a completely different process which is required. Next slide, please. All of these points, all of these steps, the correct way to box and bag samples will be in the protocols, the sample submission protocol, which has been updated. And it will be available on our website here in a few weeks once the website is updated. So we'll be able to distribute that. Next slide, please. A quick refresher, though. So regardless of the type of project, whether it's characterization, DSP, scan, coastal zone, most of the samples are all boxed the same. Please remember to bag your clods, otherwise they desiccate. Fill the empty cells with newspaper, as we see here at the image at right. It'll go in the liner bag that we provide for you. Please put 6 clod boxes per trunk. Those empty boxes serve as filler, so the samples don't shift during shipment. For bulk samples, please remember to use industrial staples only. And we'll send you the stapler and the staples. If you use desk staples, please submit Band-Aids because the desk staples are not strong enough for our sample bags. So we're always happy to provide anything that you might be short on. They will all need secondary containment, so we will also be sending this heavy liner bag. That makes sure that all of the samples stay together throughout the shipment and nothing gets free. And small samples can be boxed together in a clod box and taped closed. If you have any questions, please contact the Kssl. Next slide, please. Some additional sample types that pertain to projects such as DSP, possibly coastal zone. Each has their specific protocols. If you have coastal sulfidic soils, those are somewhat time sensitive, so please let us know in advance of sending that sample type so we can prepare in terms of freezer space and the shipment, so that we capture your samples in as much of an in situ condition as we can. Aggregate stability, please remember to tape the lids to the containers and label both. And bulk density cores, please remember to record the core volume on the bag. That's always very helpful. Next slide, please. The shipping process is really hard on samples, and these were fine when they left home, but the lids have come off of the aggregate stability pints. The clod cells collapsed, and so we don't know which clods go with which layers, and no data will be reported for either one of these examples. And at right, these are regulated samples not in a liner bag, and when we received the box, the bottom was bulging out of it and we almost lost the samples, so it was not good. Next slide, please. So once you're done sampling, please bag and box all samples according to the sample submission protocol. And please do your best not to exceed 50 pounds per box. This is a change from previous guidance. Contact your regional liaison or the points of contact in the sample submission protocol. Please let us know what RFA your samples are associated with and the box information. And the Kssl will provide the shipping labels for UPS. And to speak to the required documentation that accompanies each project is Scarlett Murphy, who is going to walk us through these steps and requirements. Thank you, Scarlett.
Thank you, Amber. Continuing on with preparing your shipment for sending to Kssl. A reminder that all submissions to Kssl must include these various forms of documentation. The first is the Kssl project sheet, which is an Excel form. The Kssl sample submission workbook, which is also an Excel document, and it has 2 tabs on there that must be filled out: the Kssl PET-on field sheet and the request for analyses. Also, please include the NRCS PET-on description report. We ask to have you please print out paper copies of these items and include them in the boxes with the samples. Also, please email electronic copies to me, Scarlett Murphy, Michelle Etmond, who is our work leader for all things shipping, receiving, and sample processing. And also, please email these documents to the lab liaisons for your area. Kssl will not start processing or analyzing your sample submission without the required paperwork. This is an example of what the Kssl project sheet looks like. Just has some basic information on it. Tells us what project name we should give the sample submission in our LIMS database, our Laboratory Information Management System. It tells us how many PET-ons are in this project submission, the name and contact information of the project leader or sample submitter, so that we know who to get in touch with if there are any issues or follow-up questions that we have about the submission. And also, this lists everyone who should be included on the data distribution list when the project is completed and ready for final review and completion. Here is the first tab of the sample submission sheet. It is the Kssl PET-on field sheet. Not too much has been updated on this form. Looks pretty similar to how it has been the past couple of years. We'd like to remind you to please complete a separate Excel workbook for each PET-on that you're submitting. Don't try and put everything on the same sheet. Please include the NRCS PET-on record ID in the cell that's allocated for that. This NRCS PET-on record ID is the very last field on the PET-on table in NRCS. For database people, it's a primary key, a unique identifier for that specific PET-on, and having that number helps us at Kssl. While we're doing login, it helps us to automate the process because we can pull some of that basic information from NRCS straight into our LIMS instead of having to hand enter everything. But yeah, please use the record ID. Don't enter the user pet on ID, the site ID, your name, anything else in that cell. Please double check that this pet on field sheet, the sample bags and the sample tags, and your NASA's description are all in agreement. The other cell that the other fields that I'd like to highlight here on this Kssl pet on field sheet that are very important are the columns under quantity of samples, and that just tells us the number of bulk samples, bulk density clod samples, undisturbed aggregate stability samples, or other sample types that you shipped to us. And having this number here helps us to verify that we received and accounted for all of the samples that you say that you shipped to us. Sometimes one will get lost or get left back at the field office, and this just gives us another check that, oh, do you really have that sample? Did it get lost? Were you not able to sample it? That's just one more check that we like to have. For bulk density samples other than clods, please include the sample volume in the volume columns. This information is required for the calculation of bulk density. The next tab on this workbook is the Request for Analyses tab. Zooming in a little bit closer, I'll point out that the user pet on ID, the field label, horizon, and depth, they all filled in based on what you had entered on the pet on field sheet, the first tab of the workbook. You can indicate the requested analyses for each horizon or layer by choosing the appropriate analysis group. Otherwise, you can request analyses a la carte using the Select Individual Analyses option. To see a full listing of what analyses are included in each group, you can either hover over the cells under the name of each analysis group that has the little red triangle. It's a note field in Excel, so a little pop-up will tell you what all is included in each group. Otherwise, it will fill in on the other part of the spreadsheet so you can see, which I will show on my next slide. Yeah, so for each horizon, you will indicate the requested analysis group by selecting the check mark from the drop-down menu in the cell. In my example here, I have the checkbox in the typical characterization analysis group on the A horizon. In the section Analysis and Selected Groups, you'll see that a check mark will automatically populate under each analysis that's included by default as a part of the analysis group. The cells that you see with a yellow background fill indicate optional analyses that can be selected if necessary based on the characteristics of the soil or the data needs of your sampling project. And if you need to remove a check mark from the analysis group or from any of the optional yellow highlighted cell analyses, to remove the check, you would right-click on the cell and choose Clear Contents. And that'll clear out the check mark so that you can select the appropriate group. Moving across the top of the Request for Analysis sheet, the first section that comes up is the physical analyses. And for layers that have bulk density samples, please indicate the appropriate analysis that's based on the sample type. So you might be familiar with like the bulk density clods, the saran dipped clods. And when those are submitted, Kssl will do third bar water retention by default on the clods also. Otherwise, there is an option for bulk density field core, compliant cavity, or known volume. And this would cover some of the alternative bulk density sample collection methods, such as the scoop, block, Macaulay, hole saw, or syringe. There's also a choice for core, and this would be used for soil cores that are submitted still intact within that metal sleeve. This method seems to have become a little less common than in the past, but still exists. And the last analyses in the physical analyses section is if you were submitting undisturbed aggregate stability samples, you would request that here by layer. The next section over is the supplemental or optional analyses. The analyses that are listed here are additional analyses which we can do at Kssl. They aren't part of a predefined analysis suite, but you can request them if they are applicable to your soil type or project needs. Lastly, we've got the mineralogy and micromorphology requests. When requesting mineralogy, we asked if you would please limit your requests for clay mineralogy XRD or optical counts to just a few layers within the PEDON. Typically, we recommend only selecting the layers within the control section or selecting, representative layers. The mineralogy analyses are some of our more time-intensive analyses, so limiting the requests helps you to get your data back faster for one thing, and also keeps our techs from analyzing redundant samples or spending a lot of time on these particular analyses. If you have a specific question to be answered, a specific reason why you are selecting maybe more mineralogy analyses than usual, let us know. We can definitely accommodate that request. It just helps us to know that you are actually looking for something. There's actually a reason why you selected those analyses, not just they looked good on the sheet, so you picked them. Also, the last section out here is the other analyses or notes section. If there's some specific analysis that you wish for us to run at Kssl that is not listed on this sheet, you can fill it in the other analyses section. You can also use this if there are any other specific instructions or comments that we should know about the particular layer, samples, or analysis requests that you're making. On the sample submission Excel book, we added a couple additional tabs, which I'll talk about next. The first tab we added is the instructions tab. And this just has some general technical information, I'll say, about completing the request for analysis sheet of the workbook, how to get the check mark, how to remove the check mark, that type of thing. We also added a tab called the Analysis Applicability Guide. The first part of this, the top half of this tab shows analyses at Kssl, which are subject to a pretest criteria and what those cutoffs are. For example, we would only, if you had requested the extractable acidity analysis, we would run effervescence as a pretest. We only do extractable acidity on samples where that effervescence pretest value is none or very slight. So if a sample had effervescence of slight or higher, we would mark that analysis not required and we would skip it. And sometimes we get questions about this, oh, I requested this, why didn't you run it? Well, here are some of the rules for why we may not run a particular analysis. Lower down on the Analysis Applicability Guide, there's also some guidance on when certain analyses may be appropriate for your soil or might not be appropriate for your soil. For example, like we talked about earlier, clay mineralogy versus optical mineralogy, when you would choose one over the other, when it's more appropriate for certain layers versus others. And there's some other things down there too. The last tab that we added is the P Analysis Guide tab. And this just gives some guidance on selecting an appropriate soil phosphorus test. Here at Kssl, we can do Bray 1, Malick 3, Olson, and water-soluble phosphorus. So this might help you to guide what selections you make. Once your submission has been received at Kssl, it's been logged in, validated, and all the analytical requests have been entered, Kssl will send an email to the submitter and the distribution list, which includes a report of all the PEDONs received and the project analysis plan. This project analysis plan gives submitters an opportunity to review the series names, taxonomic classifications, horizon designations, and depths for the submission, and also to verify that the analytical requests were entered as you had wanted. So here in this screenshot, the top half is the first page, which shows a summary of the pedons and some of the metadata about the project. The second page is the individual layers within the project. You can see the layers going down the left side, and then the analyses that will be requested across the top. And again, this is just an opportunity to review that we're on the same page of what the analytical plan for the project is. I wanted to talk about where to find some of these forms that I had just mentioned on the NRCS homepage on the soils.usda.gov. Currently, if you mouse over the topics menu and go down to technical references, that will get you to the documentation. Under the laboratory methods and information section, that is where you would find the sample submission protocol, which is basically the comprehensive resource for all things sample submission, packaging, labeling, some of the things that Amber talked about. Also, we've got the Kssl project sheet there and the Kssl sample submission workbook. However, that being said, as you're likely already aware, the NRCS websites are in the process of being updated and moved to a different system. So if you go to this laboratory methods and information page right now, you'll see that the submission protocol document and the submission files are still older versions. They're not going to match what I just showed you today. However, once the new website launches, which I believe is planned for October 21st, unless things have changed, that's what I think it is, we'll make sure that the files there will be the most up-to-date versions of those 3 documents. So right now they're out of date, but they will be updated. If you need the updated versions of any of these 3 documents before the new website launches, go ahead and reach out to me, Scarlett Murphy, and I can send them to you, or also get in touch with your Kssl liaison and they can provide you with the most up-to-date documentation. And that is the end of our slides.
Thank you, Scarlett. Thank you, Amber. We'll wait just a minute for any questions that were being typed as you were finishing up. Certainly the Charles Kellogg, who the Kellogg Soil Survey Laboratory is named after, one of the early pioneers in soil science, would really like the things that you're doing, since he was really big on documentation of standards and processes and methods. And you certainly have some very well established and very well documented processes, not only for the lab work, but for the submission of samples too.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, that sample submission protocol, I believe the last time it was updated was in 2015 or 2016, so definitely long overdue to update that.
Well, I'm not seeing any questions come in, but if there are questions that do follow, we'll make sure to have your answers added on those and posted along with the presentation to our YouTube channel. So thank you both, and we will continue on with our webinar. I do want to remind people that our next webinar is going to be November 15th. I don't know that I've seen the agenda yet for that one, but I know it'll be great. And if you have content that you want to be able to present at one of our webinar series, you're certainly welcome to do so by contacting your regional field notes representative. Our next presentation is going to be by Aaron Miller from our Santa Fe, New Mexico office, who will be speaking on update soil surveys, one LRU at a time. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dave. And hello to everybody. Hopefully I can follow that talk. Tough act, but I'll do my best. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, that should be coming up.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. So before I start, just want to give a shout out to the folks here in the Rapid City MLRA office for donating their space. Appreciate it. And yeah, my talk today is going to be updating soil surveys one LRU at a time. And I'd like to point out before I get started on this introductory slide here, the little horny toad in the bottom right corner. Well, that's the expression on his face after trying to use the legacy soil survey for this area. A little bit frustrated. So we came in here and we did a whole bunch of work, and hopefully now that our new work has been published as of October 1, we're hoping that the next time we run into this guy, he will have a smile. Okay, a little background. Our MLRA office is officially in New Mexico, in Santa Fe. There's a couple other offices in New Mexico, one in Las Cruces and one in Grants, but we are smack in the middle in the capital, Santa Fe, and I'll spend just a minute here giving you guys a little background. So Santa Fe being the capital city of the state, prior to Spanish arrival, the areas around Santa Fe were occupied for a long time, thousands of years, possibly more, by the indigenous peoples, and their villages were present in the current city location. The capital of New Mexico was first established in 1610 for New Spain, and it's the oldest capital city in North America, though not the oldest capital city in the United States. 1848, following the Mexican-American War, the U.S. officially gained New Mexico as a territory, and it was through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And then by 1912, the state of New Mexico was admitted, and then that made Santa Fe the official capital for a U.S. state. And I guess the last kind of interesting, significant thing is that it's the highest altitude U.S. capital city at a little over 7,000 foot elevation, right at the Capitol steps. And then the hills right above town do have peaks over 13,000 feet in the Santa Fe Mountains. Okay. We've got a really cool current staff. Logan Peterson is a soil scientist for over 10 years. And then we just gained Jessica Enger, who came from North Dakota, not far from where I am now. She showed up in May. And so there's 3 soil scientists in our office now. Hopefully we can expand that and get a range ecologist. That would be awesome. And of course, the old staff, myself, been around for, I'm not even going to tell you, too long. All right, so before I launch into the current update, I'm going to give some context, some, I guess, historical context based on a lot of our update work in the past. I think it's important that I preface our discussion with LRU-based updates with some of this brief background. So in 2011, the Santa Fe crew began work to map the Carlsbad Caverns National Park. And this sort of confined bit of about 46,000 acres was within the Guadalupe Mountains of the southeastern New Mexico area. It gave us an opportunity to work in really spectacular country. And it's within the Central New Mexico Highlands MLRA. But more importantly, it finally allowed us to address some of the needs for ESDs in that area, which is a task that had been in the queue for some time. talking to the locals down there. And as many of you who've worked with NPS projects will be familiar, the Park Service wanted us to specifically focus on mapping the soils and ESDs within the park boundary, right? They don't want you to go outside the boundary. They want you to just look inside the boundary. But of course, NCSS certified products, they don't really function that way. And we're trained, NRCS staff are trained to investigate ecosystems to their fullest extent, such that we develop the soil map unit concepts and ESDs that are going to characterize that full extent of the ecological range that, in this case, would have spanned over 600,000 acres in that region of the Guadalupe Mountains. So unfortunately, MLRA concepts in the region had never been thoroughly scrutinized, and they're kind of a jumbled mess of inconsistently applied boundaries and ecological themes. And in most places, it wasn't clear when one MLRA started and another stopped, such that these users, the community down there, they were really confused where they stood to even begin to decide what map unit to apply, what ESD to apply to a conservation plan. And additionally, there were some political disagreements across state lines that further blurred MLRA boundaries to the point that often there were duplicate ESDs occurring on either side of the line just to sort of placate both sides, both states. So these issues needed to be resolved before we could begin our update work. And it did end up costing us an extra year up front of concept building before we could even get started on mapping the NPS land. So this extra effort ended up serving us well in the post project because it encouraged us to start working with the local stakeholders in the neighboring MLRAs and then partnering with MLRA offices to come to the table and discuss real solutions for the future of improving future soil survey and ecological inventory work. And it helped us to start really scrutinizing and looking at MLRA boundary concepts, getting them consistent enough to withstand the test of time such that we could begin to draw future update projects that are based on those boundaries. It was clear that these new MLRA concepts needed to eventually get incorporated into the official MLRA spatial data set. And, you know, whether or not we were the first conversations in SPSD that kickstarted this latest generation of the Ag Handbook 296 update, I don't know, but it was shortly after this that the effort was launched. So as can be seen here in this comparison between the 2006 and 2022 version of the MLRA concepts in this area, we addressed overly complicated and I would say ambiguous boundaries that cut the Guadalupe Mountains in half into more simplified and unified central New Mexico highlands MLRA concepts by focusing on more explicit physiographic properties that we felt dictated real and cohesive soil and ecosystem characteristics. And although other more subtle properties of the area are important and apparent, they could be addressed in higher resolution divisions of LRUs or even ESD concepts that are going to be based more on, you know, maybe elevational transitions and climatic character. But we're fairly confident that the MLRA boundary updates that we came up with are going to remain undisputed. So right, yeah, this project, it was kind of an awakening to us regarding the importance of working systematically on updates, making sure that before we begin an update project, we're starting with a strong LRA foundation with a consistent framework from the land resource region all the way to the LRU, land resource unit. If that division is needed in an area, some MLRAs don't need an LRU or haven't worked on those yet. But for us, yes, LRUs seem to be pretty important. And you know, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record throughout this talk by using some of the phrases, but this is really the best way we can ensure that we will be applying consistent concepts that any future update would be able to build upon, and removing the possibility that we would need to go backwards again in future update projects. We don't want to have to go back and reinvent these wheels The idea here is to create a framework such that future updates will be progress and not revisiting old problem areas. And so here's a boundary. This is currently our Santa Fe, part of our Santa Fe office MLRA boundary. We have responsible for managing 4 different MLRAs, but this is 70A, the project area I'll be discussing in detail. And though, again, we cover 4 physiographic provinces from our office responsibilities, this project specifically in 70A covers the Great Plains province, and it includes the highest elevation part of it since it's up against the Southern Rocky Mountains. For the size and complexity of this MLRA, we developed LRU boundaries. Again, like I said, they are important for our MLRAs, and that gives us the ability to apply our update to a more focused set of interrelated soils and ecological sites. That's interrelated term is one of those broken record terms. I'm probably going to say it a lot throughout this talk, but I think that's really important. Again, this is a focused set of interrelated soils and ecological sites. And this map shows our best sort of pre-mapping guess of the LRU boundaries that we estimated at about this 1 to a million scale, appropriate for an LRU. It provided us with some rough bookends for the scope of the update work. That's an important part of project planning. The benefits to updating an entire interrelated set at one time injects a substantial amount of efficiency and consistency into the inventory work. So, you've got the entire collection of soil and ecosite concepts being built with clear relationships across the landscape, such that the distinctive and functional characteristic differences between each soil component with respect to hydrology, plant community dynamics, and soil parent materials have context between each other. And the update, I'll just say this real quick, the update to MLRA 78.1 it's now available in Surgo as of October 1st, so feel free to navigate after this talk around in your free time to one of the 5 updated counties in the northeastern corner of New Mexico. All right, talk about map unit design a little bit. We'll launch in here. Our update used a more geomorphic approach to mapping, such that landforms and landform position or character are used or were used as the starting point for the component concepts. The soil properties were then tied to that geomorphic model, where one or more components then became integrated into landform-based map unit concepts, and their relevant positions on that landform. And you can see here that we've taken some, I would say, modernized liberties with the map unit naming conventions and applied geomorphic terms to the map unit phase. And this is an update to the traditional map unit naming convention that most of you are familiar with, using slope classes or maybe other eroded terms as naming phases. And we feel that slope information is kind of becoming more widespread across many different disciplines, and it's really available by a variety of easily accessible apps and tools to the general public. Most of you probably use a lot of these, and so we're familiar with them. And it's kind of no longer one of the unique deliverables that our soil surveys deliver. And our soil survey publications are probably one of the last places folks are going to go look for terrain maps. So I kind of feel like it's better to reallocate the focus of our soil map units back into our realm of expertise. All right, I'll talk more about eroded phases in a minute here. Here's what some of our spatial updates look like. We've got a big emphasis on areas of sort of water run-on features. They're as important landscape characteristics in these semi-arid grasslands. And here you can see that we emphasize playas and drainage ways as concept updates to the previous mapping. Other bottomland types such as fluvial systems also received a lot of attention as we separated out the stable positions of stream terraces from those of the more dynamic floodplain complexes. And we also collapsed outdated legacy map unit concepts, such as those eroded phases, right? We felt that these were temporal land conditions that rendered our soil survey manuscripts pretty much obsolete upon publication. Changes in land use since the 50s and 60s, when much of the legacy map unit mapping was conducted out in this part of the world, they've altered the evidence of sort of past state mappings, such as for eroded phases. And these delineations are no longer obvious, right? They're outdated. In fact, there are probably a lot of newer locations that would now be, or could now be, candidates for eroded phases or other degraded terms, from which there's too many to choose from, I think, to create all unique map unit components for each, possible eroded phase. And really, the way that we populate the NASA's component data set, it's not robust enough to quantitatively distinguish between all those possibilities. And what we currently have in much of our legacy soil surveys is basically a set of outdated map units without data that supports in real quality interpretations for degraded ecological states. And at this point, I think it's much safer to address these through the state transition models. And hopefully that'll become, more quantitative through time as our knowledge and contributions of DSP data is also going to expand this. And obviously it's going to take some time. So for this update, we really designed our map unit components to rely on their correlation to the ESDs, their state transition models, and that's going to give us the ability to tease out all the possible degraded states for any component. And it's going to use a mix of quantitative and qualitative indicators of soil health and ecosystem dynamics. We found this strategy is going to be far more practical to the users. And these are public users that now have also the links in Web Soil Survey and other soil survey apps. They have those links from components to the edit database, and they can seamlessly achieve those correlations. So we feel we needed to incorporate these valuable tools into the update. Okay, so again, when we stopped publishing hardcover manuscripts, we also felt that the soil survey updates began to rely on generated map unit descriptions from kind of a NASA's data dump. And the advantage, of course, to using those mugs has been consistency in how we deliver map unit descriptions. But the disadvantages have, I feel, been more widespread as we've lost that tacit narrative that describes, what makes this type of land unique, what stands out about this map unit. This is the kind of insight that's not provided using only a generated table. So we've chosen in this update to resurrect that lost art of drafting the map unit description narrative as a value-added, customer-centric deliverable. And this narrative, when thoughtfully drafted, it records that tacit knowledge about this significant type of land. What is that significance? And what did the investigators understand about it such that it deserved its own map unit concept? I think the intent here is to provide that profound context of the soil landscape ecosystem that it's not, at first obvious from a data table. It's also going to address associations with neighboring map units or components of them. And again, descriptions that the tabular data set's not really designed to cover, and it can guide the user to learn more about the soil and ecosystem dynamics from the ESD if need be. So for instance, maybe some examples of what might be in a map unit description narrative is, it might answer or it might give more insight to the soil properties. Like, is it meaningful? For instance, if a soil in this LRU has secondary carbonates in the profile, is that important, or maybe that's just a common trait in all the soils of this LRU, of this landscape type? Is this the only soil in the area with oxyaquic morphology, or is that really common in bottomland complexes? Does this landscape position relative to other neighboring components have any significance? Are there restrictions that stand out? Maybe limitations for building, or are there farming implications? I think those are really important, that we're able to highlight significant features about a soil that might not otherwise be obvious from a data table. All right, so now I'm going to go through and kind of highlight some statistics from our update. We created, this is again across 5 counties in Mexico. You can see those different colors are the 5 different counties. And the update created 28 new MLRA map units that completely replaced 50 legacy map units from these 5 counties: San Miguel, Mora, Colfax, Union, and Harding counties. There were 100 more legacy map units from these 5 counties that were touched by the new MLRA map units, but those map units were not completely removed from active legends because a lot of these polygons spilled over into other LRU concepts. Those LRUs didn't exist before this update, so there's a little bit of messy overlap there that will need to be adjusted in future updates. And then 56 new MLRA soil components are correlated to those map units, and there's 14 new ESDs that are unique to this LRU correlated to those components, to those 56 soil components. The new ESDs all have functional STMs. They're all provisional, but they exceed the provisional status. We've filled them out completely and given them lots of good context. So yeah, they meet all the standards for a correlated ESD, except that we've not had a range ecologist on staff to develop their specific plant tables. So they include sort of best fit plant tables currently from available references and sources, such as the legacy MLRA 70 ESDs that currently existed, other soil survey manuscripts, range site descriptions, and any other references that have been published, or plant lists, maybe from the NVC or other sources that we were able to find. Let's see, there's 9 new soil series, 8 updated legacy soil series, and 1 renamed and updated soil series that we had to address from the offensive soil series names. We swapped out the swastika series now to Philmont. So there's nowhere in the Surgo data set that has swastika as a named series. And then soil series, just as a side note, soil series that were previously used and had to be abandoned included concepts from as far away as north central Arizona. So other MLRAs like 35 and 39, West Texas, MLRA 77, and from the Trans-Pecos Mountains to central New Mexico highlands, the MLRA 42s. And they've been completely replaced by soil series that are now established within this 70A MLRA. So they're now in their proper home. And all the new MLRA soil survey updates will aim to, from this point out, to continue to cleanse map unit components of soil series with concepts that are foreign, that are from other MLRAs, from different landscapes, climatic and ecosystem relationships, theoretically don't apply from other MLRAs. Okay, so these are those pre-mapped LRU boundaries again, now superimposed on the update polygons. I thought this was kind of interesting to look at after the fact, sort of post-game quarterbacking. And I think in many locations it worked out pretty well. I think those boundaries ended up being pretty useful. So this is a good opportunity to talk about the importance of the ES keys that we developed. Often we're called out, prior to this update, often we were called out by the field offices for TSS work by the staff that were struggling with our soil surveys, such that, in locations where the map unit polygon didn't list a reasonable component for the soils in their conservation plan, like either a major or minor component that was listed in the map unit were inadequate for the application practice they were trying to deliver, and often they were going with a best guess as part of the outcome. But really, that's kind of limited to what's provided in the soil survey. I mean, they can't just randomly choose a soil of their liking. They do have to choose it from that area. And I think that sort of static version of the way that we published our legacy soil surveys didn't really permit the user to evaluate all the possible associated soil components and ecological sites that really possibly occurred in the area, and simply because there hasn't been a really well curated guide of options to choose from, other than the map unit description that comes up on their toolkit screen, basically. And so I feel like providing a good comprehensive ES key along with these updates, and a lot of us have been working on these with the PES initiative, but by providing a really good quality comprehensive ES key with this update, that's going to give the users more the ability to more effectively validate a specific soil component with a higher level of accuracy and maybe a better level of certainty, and that's going to lead to a higher likelihood that the correct interpretations are going to be applied to a conservation plan and their strategy. So I feel like ES keys are a really big part of helping the conservation planners out. So it's also interesting to note, just as a side note here, that our strongest boundaries occurred. Again, these are our LRU lines, occurred at the boundary between 70A.1, which was the Canadian plateaus, with the volcanic plateaus. That was sort of a real obvious break. Geologically, those are striking boundaries. Those margins provided really good boundaries, but lesser so with the High Plains LRU, which is kind of the Ogallala part of this area. And then our weakest boundary was the intersection of the Mesozoic canyons and breaks, that MCB. So that's just kind of how it fell out. But in any case, what's important is that our LRU keys, that's also going to kind of provided with the map unit descriptions, are going to provide more assistance to the users for on the ground validation of each of these. It will give them opportunity also to go back and think about, well, what is the difference between the LRUs, not just the ESDs or the map units, but to make sure that they're starting with the right key. You've got to start with the right ES key in order to land on the right ESD. So we're giving them that validation tool as well. I felt like that was important. Okay, so what's next? Where are we going from here? And by this time, we're expecting that all of our updates for the Canadian Plateaus LRUs, are going to get, they're all going to get updated, and that means that we're going to, we have a long road ahead of us of update work. But we've been working really closely with a lot of the field offices, and in that last update, we made sure they were a big part of testing our ideas and concepts and keys. They helped us to iterate them until we were satisfied that they were getting the most useful version. And we're hoping to get a lot more feedback from them in the future as we begin to move into newer updates. And again, everything that we learned from this previous update project is going to get rolled into, incorporated into our next projects. So the next one's going to be the Volcanic Plateaus LRU, which is estimated at about 1.2 million acres. Yeah, I've talked a little bit about it, so I'll kind of just introduce it here and leave you all with that. Here's that boundary extracted from the LRU line work, again, that was estimated as sort of pre-mapping. Here's Jessica and Logan. This is definitely mollisol country, and so lots of really productive soils out here. Even though it is sort of, you know, a semi-arid area, these landscapes have the capacity to produce a lot of grass and a lot of other plant community, you know, very diverse biologically, these systems. Among many other valuable parts to the update are going to be also more playas. They're definitely a significant feature of the volcanic plateaus. And you can see in this legacy mapping, there's a pretty big need to cut these out. They're important to the users, land managers out in this area. And that's it. I'll conclude with this nice image of a playa on the volcanic plateaus. So yeah, that's it. Dave, I'll send it back to you for a wrap up and questions.